Hi, I'm Mark Reed. Follow me as I attempt to put my new book, Impact Culture, into practice and discuss it with others taking a similar journey. You'll get tips that will help you achieve more impact from your research and stay healthy, no matter how busy you are. Rediscover your purpose. Lead from behind to empower those around you. Transform your work culture. Welcome to Season 4 of the Fast Track Impact Podcast. So this week, I am very privileged to have with me today Michael Parker, who is Director of Operations at The Conversation. Now, if you're not familiar with The Conversation, it is well worth checking out. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can see what they do. And it's really a unique platform for researchers who want to get their evidence out to a much wider audience. So I'm going to unpack this a bit, find out a bit more about this from Michael, and get you to ask yourself if this is a platform you might be interested in engaging with. But we're doing this as part of a theme that I've been working on over the last few episodes on evaluation. And so once we understand what we're talking about with The Conversation, we're going to be unpacking a media impact guide and toolkit that Michael and I co-created with what was their media advisory board, group even, at The Conversation to help researchers, but also press officers and professional services teams working on impact, work more effectively with the media to generate impact, and as part of that, be able to evaluate both the reach and significance of impact that arises from media engagement. And that's not as easy as it might sound. So let's start by giving you a chance, Michael, to just introduce yourself, what you do, and The Conversation for anyone who's not familiar with the incredible opportunity that The Conversation is for researchers.
Thank you, Mark. What an intro. The Conversation, it has been running for 10 years now in the UK. And we're a news website, essentially. The Conversation is a news website. It covers breaking news and themes from current affairs, things that are going on in the UK and around the world, of a really broad range of topics right across the kind of spectrum of knowledge, from the hard sciences, environment, health, to the politics, business, education, and the arts. So it's a very broad church. And the unique aspect of The Conversation, if you like, is that we're not reporters, we're not journalists in the sense that we are interviewing people and writing up the results. We are commissioning editors, and everything that is published on The Conversation is created by an academic, a researcher, someone we've identified as having the expertise to bring our readers some additional insight or analytical value on the current news stories of the day that perhaps they can't find elsewhere in the general press. So it's an opportunity for researchers and academics to really use our platform to take the opportunity to speak to a very broad international audience of many millions of readers right across the world, and to share with them the kind of fruits of their intellectual labour, their expertise, generally particular pieces of research that have come to fruition, perhaps. And of course, our readers, who ultimately, as taxpayers, have paid for it all at some point in the process, they get to benefit from the return of real experts and expertise to the public sphere, back into discussion. And I think that's been something that people have long been concerned about in terms of the quality of news media in general. Who is this person opining at 500 words on a particular topic? What do they know about it? Why should I be listening to them? And so The Conversation offers a platform that people increasingly understand and know and trust, that what they're going to read there comes from not just the need to hit 500 words by a deadline, but the fact that the authors are coming at it from years or decades even of close research of the topic.
Yeah, and you do have an incredibly strong reputation and a phenomenal reach. It's worth making people aware that this is free to access for researchers. You don't have to pay any kind of page charges or anything like that. It is, of course, open access. That's the point. And compared to talking to a journalist who will ultimately make all of the decisions about what ultimately gets published, you have a much higher degree of editorial control. I think, in fact, you have final say, don't you, as the researcher? Is that how it works?
That's right. It's something like that. We're very aware that, academics will have dealt with the media in the past before the conversation came into existence. So, I understand that some will be somewhat nervous about it. And indeed, many people would have joined the Life Academic to do research and teaching and never have any the slightest interest in working with the media. So, I think it's fair to say that increasingly academics realise that this is something that they ought to be doing, should consider. They're certainly being lent on to do it more by universities. And through the REF and the impact agenda, of course, there's more structural incentives to do so. But we acknowledge all those pressures, and we want to this is a partnership. We're not here as journalists to put you on the spot and make you look foolish. This is an act of co-creation. You are going to be working with an editor from the outset who will be able to help shape that piece, suggest angles, suggest things that our readers might be interested in, and of course edit that piece to make sure that it's the best version of that piece that it can be. That it's written in a style and a tone that is accessible to non-specialists, and therefore it's readable and gets read, because that's what we want, And we have an online editing tool that we use, and there's a button in the corner of that marked approve. And if the author doesn't approve the piece, then we won't use it. It's as simple as that. We definitely put the ball in your court, and we want to ensure that even if, which is quite likely, the final words of the piece are not necessarily the same words that you filed to begin with. Even if they're not the same words, the meaning has not been lost in transit. And that's what's important. And that's why it's important that the academic has that role in reading through and signing off the final version so that it's to their liking.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I hear regularly from my colleagues is as one of the key attractions to this. Yeah, I don't do media engagement because I've had bad experiences in the past, but the conversation is the one safe way of doing that. Of course, there's nothing to stop that then getting picked up by other media outlets and reported in other ways, and you can't control that. But that is also part of the magic of what happens with the conversation. And not meaning to put you too much on the spot, but I wonder, can you think of any recent stories that you've run that have then got taken up by national news outlets and that did well? Because that is a fairly regular feature of conversation articles. Journalists are scouring the conversation and picking up stories, and very often then they go much further afield as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are sort of two ways this happens. One is that, as you mentioned, all of our content is open access. So we are an open access publication. Everything we publish is published under Creative Commons, a CC by ND license. So it means that others can republish our work verbatim without changing it. And that means that we, by giving our content away, essentially, can tap into the established audiences of other, perhaps larger media, which means your expertise travels further. But so a great number, if not almost all of our pieces are republished by someone somewhere. That could be really major publications such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, The Times, the Jakarta Post, Channel News Asia, RTE in Ireland. I mean, it's a really very international readership. On the other hand, what journalists tend to do is they find a story that someone else has done and they do their own version of it. So very often, even if other media don't republish our work, they will read it and go, that's a great story. And they'll just ring up the academic themselves and get some fresh quotes. I mean, if they're lucky, or they'll just rip off ours. But I'll give one example that was quite recent, was a piece about it was written by a microbiologist from Leicester, the University of Leicester, and she wrote about food safety. Here's when I would throw food away, and here's here's where I would, I would eat it, and here's some of the markers of safety. And of course, that was catnip, and that was picked up right across the British press, in the tabloids, in the broadsheets. It went international. It's always a shame when we see that others have used our work and not necessarily credited us. But that is par for the course. We're here as a conduit for knowledge to travel, and if sometimes it travels without our name attached to it, then that's just that's something we'll have to live with.
Yeah, so we get to the point now where we're reaching big audiences. So in impact terms, we've got reach, and our press offices will be able to pick that up, and you yourself will have metrics for your own articles, and great. So we've got reach. But as I've been explaining earlier in this theme on the podcast, reach without any evidence of significance is kind of meaningless. I might have reached millions of people, but maybe nobody understood a word I was saying because I spoke in impenetrable jargon. Maybe I've offended millions of people. I don't know. And so we need some kind of evidence of significance for this to really count as impact, for us to care about it ultimately. And I think this is one of the reasons that academics are sometimes dissuaded from working with the media because, well, it's a lot of time, a lot of risk, and actually, will you get any meaningful impacts from this? And so we'll think about how you go about measuring significance. But for me, the approach that I take to this is to say, well, great, early career, I'm not very sure, perhaps what impact I want. Maybe, yes, it's a little bit scattergun, but engaging with the media is a great way of just creating this huge funnel that will then funnel interest in. And now I've got a whole load of external contacts, people contacting me saying, ooh, that's interesting. Could we work with you on this or that or the next thing? And so, yeah, scattergun approach actually may be strategic early on if you're not very sure what you want to achieve from your work and you just want to put some stuff out there and see what comes back. For those of us who do have a bit of a clearer idea of what we are trying to achieve, then my recommendation is to always start with an impact plan. What is it that we want to see change in the world? What are the benefits we're seeking? And then what are the different methods or activities we can use? And of course, then media engagement being one, probably of many different mechanisms that we might use to get that out there. And at that point, there's going to be particular audiences, particular groups, organizations even, perhaps even politicians that we're trying to influence, that we might then choose a media outlet that will help us target those particular people to achieve a particular goal. For example, changing understanding, raising awareness, perhaps even changing attitudes, trying to provoke some kind of decision or behavior change, all of which I would categorize as now evidence of significance. So I wonder, what is your response to people who say, yeah, media and impact, it's a wild goose chase. There's no point in investing that time and risk if you want impact.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic comment I get by reply in emails is, if it's not refable, I don't want it, or words to that effect.
And of course, for the international listeners, REFable means eligible to include to the UK's Research Excellence Framework, which has a very strong focus on the significance of impact. And this, in the UK at least, I think is what's driving a lot of people's reticence. But I think it's a comment that I do hear elsewhere as well. So yeah, sorry, carry on, Michael.
I think the feature here is that impact as a word is incredibly loaded and has, very specific meanings in some contexts that are relevant only to the UK, as you said, and other more broad meanings and implications for others. And I think that, the bald fact is, if you're talking about, what can the media do to deliver the kind of crystal clear causative narrative that shows that your research went out into the world and caused a number of high-profile, significant changes or benefits to the world. I mean, it's a tall order. It's a tall order for the entire teams of staff working in impact that universities have hired for the last 10 years or more. So, I think we have to be realistic here. But it's equally, absolutely the case that that using the media to your advantage is just a good idea. It's going to enable you to reach places that you might not be able to reach. It's going to enable you to start conversations you might not have been able to have otherwise. It's going to provide almost certainly, opportunities and influence on the way, possibly, to also creating impact. And I think that, you mentioned early career researchers, and I think that's absolutely the case that, we have a lot of early career researchers work for us. A lot of PhD students write about their thesis. A lot of postdocs and sort of junior staff are keen to get involved. They recognise the benefits that this kind of writing, that this kind of engaging with public audiences can bring to them personally, to their career, and to the visibility of the work that they're doing and the research topics that they're working on. They also perhaps have more time and more inclination to do so because they realise now at the beginning of their career how incredibly competitive academia is. I think those three aspects of what I call opportunities, influence, and impact, they all build on one another. You can use the media, and you'll find that by writing a piece for The Conversation, for example, or for any other kind of well-read publication, what you're doing is you're putting your head above the parapet and you're saying, look at me, I'm an expert in public. Here's what I know. Here are the topics that I know about. I've got some views. I can share you some facts. And that means that anyone going looking for people who know about those things will find you. They'll find you because you've stepped outside of the world of the cloistered, paywalled Elsevier's journals, and you've produced something which is easy to read, easy to find, accessible in both senses of the term, and that means that people punching keywords into Google will find what you've produced. And that's going to lead to, we hear it all the time from our authors, invitations to go and give speeches or talks or and get involved in conferences, to get involved in grant bids or applications, to do collaborations with other academics, TEDx talks, book deals, lots of other media spots, interviews or otherwise, lots of that kind of thing. And all of these are opportunities that come about because you can now be found and tied to a subject upon which you have things to share. And I think that's really important for the person doing it, but also for our audience who get to learn about those things. And then you build up from those opportunities and you end up becoming a more well-known person, perhaps, associated with your topic. And that means people start coming to you for your expertise in more influential settings. For example, quite recently we had someone, two authors from Stirling and Leicester, if I recall, who had done a piece of research about the recognition, the ability of people to recognise faces from photographs of those faces, and the degree to which, in fact, people were spectacularly bad at this. And that the degree to which they were bad at this got even worse when they were attempting to match a photo to a face of someone from a different ethnicity to theirs. And this was brought in, they were asked to go in and give evidence to the all-party parliamentary group on democracy and the Constitution, which was looking into this business about voter ID that was brought in this year for the first time. And the party, the APBG report clearly says that this is one of a number of factors that the committee had looked at that made it clear that what's happened is that a change in the law to attempt to resolve a problem that was nominally a problem has in fact brought in a great number of additional problems that weren't a problem previously. And this was one of the evidence that was given. So, is it possible, even at this point, to say these people did that research and then it ended up in Parliament and then it led to the change of the law? Well, maybe not yet, but clearly that has entered an influential setting where it may well be part of an ultimate decision to reverse that piece of legislation or some such. So I think, to summarise, one of the problems that we have, which is the same problem that all universities and researchers have, is that impact is hard.
Yeah.
And often the timescales across which it happen are very, very long. And that means that you have to keep on top of things and keep circling back to them over a long period of time. But I think even without, demanding that media provide you with gold standard, ref standard impact, it can be invaluable in all sorts of other ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's intriguing for me is that media exposure like that as an early career researcher can be particularly valuable. And ultimately, you don't have to be the world expert in this, as long as you have enough expertise and enough confidence in what you do know to be able to put yourself out there. And what happens is that actually groups like that All Parliamentary Group, others looking for experts, they come to the people who are most accessible. And if you are accessible, visible, and credible enough, you do not have to be the world expert in this. So my own first interaction with the media happened in the final year of my PhD. And I think this is probably quite an unusual scenario. So a colleague of mine published a paper. I contributed to this paper as a co-author. I put this idea into this paper that perhaps one day carbon markets might be able to pay to fix damaged peat bogs. And the Guardian newspaper picked up on the paper, contacted the lead author, and this was the idea that they were interested in. And the lead author was like, I'm a scientist, I don't know nothing about policy. That was Mark's idea, go and talk to him. And somewhat startled, I spoke to them and said, yeah, it's just an idea, and I've got no idea if it would work, but it is a credible idea, and here's why. That turned into an article in the Guardian newspaper that got picked up by a charity that was trying to fix damaged peat bogs but didn't have enough money, who phoned me up to say, great, so how do we get hold of this carbon money? And again, I was like, it was just an idea. I don't really know. But if you'd be up for it, how about we collaborate together and try and put in a funding proposal? And 4 funding proposals later, over £1 million of research, and a decade later, we had launched a mechanism called the Peatland Code, and that's now led to such a range of significant impacts that scored 4 stars, the top score possible in the last Research Excellence Framework. But it all started with the Guardian picking up this work, and one conversation leading to another, leading to something else.
Yeah. I mean that's fantastic, and I think that I really can't emphasize that point enough. You have to be visible when experts, or when anybody, in policy, in government, in industry, NGOs in the third sector, when they're looking for people to help them, when they're looking for experts to help them out, when they're looking for people to consult with, they are just not going to be poring over citation databases and looking for the most heavily cited author in XYZ field. They're just going to type things into Google and see what comes up. And if you are not there in Google outside Elsevier's paywalls, you're not. If you don't buy a ticket, you're not going to win the lottery. So it's just really important to think of it as a parallel track of work that you do in addition to your scientific work, in addition to your research. All of that, publishing papers, doing work, all of that is your meat and vegetables of your academic career, and that's unavoidable. But if you are also at the same time writing accessible, easy to read, easy to understand versions of your work, excerpts of your work, then that acts as a kind of parallel guide to people that can signpost into your academic work for those that are interested, but exists out in the world for people to come across. And I think that's a really important thing, a way to consider it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to come to this question around evaluating impact, the problem that we've got is that the evidence of reach is fairly self-evident. It's quite easy to get, and it can be very impressive. But getting evidence of significance is much trickier. Now, I've talked about this in more detail a few episodes ago now, so episode 38 of this season, and so I'm not going to go back into this in any more depth, but I'll just kind of headline the ideas, and you can go back if you've not heard this and listen to that episode. But one of the first things that you can do very, very quickly and easily is have a look at some of the social media around this. That could just be looking at some social media analytics on your own platform, potentially. It could be about actually trying to do a bit of analysis on that. So some content analysis, pulling out word clouds. Ooh, looks like something interesting going on there. Maybe now I do some qualitative analysis. Maybe even click through to some of those people and ask them a few additional questions. It is always worth bearing in mind, if you are analysing social media data, then you need to put that through ethics, because there are some quite challenging ethics around informed consent when it comes to how we use that kind of data. The other way that we can do this is that you've got a piece that's come out in the conversation. Maybe that leads to a TV appearance. We can do before-after polling, so you can hire a polling company to get a representative audience of that program that you're going to appear on, and look at them before and after your appearance and see to what extent you informed them, changed their attitudes, they created intentions perhaps to do things as a result of what they heard. And the third and final approach, which I described, was what I'm describing as a kind of a free version of that, where you work with an influencer on social media to get a survey in front of as many people as possible from that audience on the night in question, accepting that it's not going to be a representative sample, accepting it's going to be a bit harder work, and try and incentivize people to either answer a survey, join your mailing list, just answer the survey on the social media platform itself, maybe come to a focus group or whatever else it might be. And it's maybe going to be a small data set, but you'll get a sense then of, how did this actually land? What were the benefits for people? So I don't know if you've got any reflections on that, and if you can maybe share some of the kinds of metrics that you have already in the conversation, and the kinds of evidence that you think have value to demonstrate impact, Michael.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for us because, of course, we are a media organisation, so impact is not primarily what we're gathering and what we're evidencing. So all our authors will have, when they create an account with the conversation and when they produce content with us, they will have access to a dashboard that provides them with readership figures and so forth about their articles, geographic breakdown of where their readers come from, a breakdown of which other websites have republished their work. Up until recently, it also had tweets, but that's unfortunately been turned off because of various shenanigans going on at Twitter, very well publicised shenanigans. That may come back in the future, who knows? So there's a sort of range of what are very strictly reach-related metrics there that are available. And you can look at those on an institution level as well, which are very popular, I would say. So leaderboard of most read articles and most read authors are very popular. But we also have a widget that allows academics to self-report the sort of post-publication follow-up and engagement that is much more of towards the line of significance and a sort of impactful activity. So essentially, when we publish a piece, you'll be notified immediately. And then a couple of weeks later, you'll get another notification saying, 2 weeks ago, you published this. What's happened since? And you'll get another one of those emails about 6 months after publication as well. And this is just a prod to nudge academics to click the link, come back to their dashboard and record that information. So 2 weeks after publication, it might be, I was interviewed by RTE, I was contacted by a Turkish radio station, I was asked to go on Three Counties radio. All kind of common 2-week-old activities. 6 months down the line, a year down the line, it might be that other organisations are catching up with you. Perhaps NGOs want to consult with you. Perhaps industry R&D want to hear your views. Perhaps you've been invited to go and give evidence to a select committee or an APPG committee, these sorts of things. And these are inevitably very important and inevitably very difficult to capture without relying upon the kind of reporting that we get back from the authors themselves and the various nudges that we use over the course of a year to prompt them to do so. And I think it's useful for us to be able to record these things because it obviously demonstrates the value of the conversation, if you like, in bringing this expertise from where it is to where it has ended up creating these kinds of these influential situations or this impact. It's also useful for the author to be able to store that amongst all the rest of their data inside the dashboard. But really, this is increasingly a big thing for, I think, the media broadly. I mean, speaking, as a former journalist, there's a big movement now amongst the mainstream press, certainly some elements of it more so than others, to find ways of using this kind of language that is very prevalent in academia to define and to further elucidate the value that they bring. So the language of impact is increasingly arriving. You've got organisations like, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in the UK or ProPublica in the US. These are media organisations that are obviously very geared at investigations and change and public goods. So it makes perfect sense for them to focus on the impact of their work, because if they're doing their work well to the level that they would wish, then they are genuinely creating impacts. They're uncovering wrongs and they are driving changes. So it makes sense for them to report these, just as a researcher might report this kind of impact. But I think a wider range of media organisations are going to be doing this in the future, and we are one of them. So over the last couple of months, since the summer, we had a big summit in the summer of all of the conversation editions around the world. And what you might call a pivot to impact is something that is very much on the cards. So we are going to be looking in much more detail about how we can not necessarily align ourselves with the way that universities and academics are interested in impact, but definitely begin to talk much more the same language and to throw resources, technology, to bend the platform in such a way that we can help you to demonstrate these sorts of things, which will in turn help us to demonstrate the value of the platform. So more to say on this in coming months and years, but I think it's going to be a bigger deal for media organisations in the future.
Yeah, but I think this is something that you have very much been pioneering. When we were talking about this back in 2020, was it 2019 even? And you, I think, recently introduced that system at that point, which is long before most other news organisations have even been thinking about this. In part because you're working with researchers who want this kind of evidence. So great to get a sense of what you're doing and that recognition, as I've talked about in this theme on the podcast, that impacts mature over time. And great, let's capture that immediate activity, everything that happens in that first 2 weeks. But it's by month 6, potentially, that some much more interesting things might be happening. And so you helping people to collect that's great. But lots of food for thought in your answer there in terms of how researchers might go about this themselves, whether or not they're necessarily working with the conversation. And of course, one of the people that researchers often will go to for help is an impact officer or someone from professional services within their institution. So I'm doing all this work with the media. How do I evaluate that? And one of the frustrations I hear from my professional services colleagues is that they only find out about this after it's happened. And had they been involved earlier, then they might have been able to advise the researchers on how they might have made more of that opportunity in terms of setting that up with pathways to various follow-on activities or other ways in which they might be able to deepen engagement, add further value, and generate more impact, perhaps. But also ways of measuring the impact. So a couple of those methods I was talking about would require you to have something set up, ready to go for the night of your news appearance, for example. And once that's happened, it's happened, and it's much harder to get that kind of evidence. But at the same time, press officers also report similar levels of frustration where researchers regularly come to them the day before they're about to publish a really exciting paper to say, oh, this is coming out tomorrow. Can you do something about this? And actually, there's a really nice connection here where impact officers should, in theory, be supporting their researchers to plan for impact early doors. So we've got a new project. Greg, what's our post-award plan for making a difference with this? Now we've got this funding in, and we're looking 3 years ahead now about what we're hoping to achieve. And that means that we get to work ahead of time with press offices as well, and really build something that's not just that kind of one-off splash, but something that is much more additive and potentially has the ability to make a bigger difference. And so the final part of the media impact guide and toolkit that we created together, which is in the toolkit, is for those professional services teams and for press office teams. And I guess the final thing, read it and see for yourself. I think one of the key things that really came out to me from the research we did to underpin the guide was the added value of just a bit of knowledge exchange between these two teams. Press offices have incredibly valuable information, knowledge, networks, tools that impact officers can use. And equally, impact officers have very similar but different knowledges that can enable press officers to do their work better. And in the survey that we did, it was only about 50% of press office staff and professional services teams actually had regular interaction with each other. And so potentially lots of room for exciting collaboration there. Any final thoughts on that theme, Michael, and what that opportunity space looks like from your perspective?
Absolutely. It's funny how, a conversation we had in, I think it was summer of 2019 or maybe the spring of 2019 when I first proposed you coming to talk at the Media Advisory Group, and that sort of evolved into this piece of work. And this has become a sort of bee in my bonnet now because, research teams are very focused on their thing and comms teams are very focused on theirs. And it seems evident to me that there is overlap there. It seems evident to me that, the skills of the communications office, their knowledge of the media, their knowledge of how to access the media, their knowledge of and access to tools, media monitoring tools, and all sorts of other things. All of this could be useful to impact teams, to research teams. And likewise, as you say, the perennial complaint of comms teams is that, why are you coming to me with this press release that you've knocked up yesterday? Why are you coming to this to me now? Why did you not come to me, at least a week ago, if not longer? So I think just this sense in which how can we create the tools and the opportunities and to coax these two groups who are, in many respects working parallel to each other, but for the same ends. Everyone wants to see the institution's research out in the world being used, read, learned from, used for good. And wouldn't it make more sense if they were doing this together rather than, in series, in parallel? And I think, this idea that was a part of the Media Impact Guide has then gone on to inform a lot of the ambition of a new event that we have now at the Conversation called Exchange. Exchange is kind of an evolution of these twice annual meetings that we used to have with all the comms officers of our member institutions. It was a bit of a kind of a talking shop opportunity for us to introduce new features or get feedback on things. Everyone could meet each other, have a glass of wine. So that kind of evolved into Exchange, which has just had this year its second annual event. And Exchange is very much a conference aimed at university comms teams and university research impact teams. And the idea here is to provide a kind of a day where we discuss issues that are of interest to them, issues about the sector, things that they're concerned about, things that matter to them. But also it provides a means, an opportunity to meet each other, to meet your peers from across the sector, to meet your opposite numbers, possibly at the same university that you may not have spoken to yet, but undoubtedly at other universities too, and to provide an opportunity for these groups to put their heads together and think about how they might work more effectively together in this particular regard. Right. So I've had great fun organising the last couple of exchanges. It's gone very well. We had about 100 people this year. We had a talk about AI. We've had talks about research culture, impact culture, and social media strategies, all sorts of things. So there's something for everyone, and I'm hoping that it will become a real fixture of the year where I can continue to bring these two different groups of people together with the hope that they will do better for each other and ultimately the research that their academics are producing.
Great. We're going to wrap things up, but before we do so, if I'm listening to this and I want to get on a mailing list or in some other way find out about next year's Engage, how do I do that?
Exchange, yeah. If you go to theconversation.com/UK/exchange, you'll find the sort of landing page for the site there, and you'll find some reviews of the last couple of years, and there is a link to sign up. And indeed, if you're unfamiliar with the conversation, then do indeed go and check it out. You can sign up for our daily newsletter, which is about 15 stories every day, Monday to Saturday. And it's a good way of getting a sense of the kind of things we cover, how we cover them. And if anyone wants to start thinking about writing for the conversation, it's an absolute must to read what we produce first. But yeah, come and have a read, and hopefully you'll find something to inspire you to go on and do more.
Fantastic. Michael, what a pleasure. We got to work very intensely while we were creating the toolkit. We've only spoken sporadically since, but it is always such an inspiration talking to you. Thank you, Michael, for taking the time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.